These battles cannot be contested alone. I have no political affiliation whatsoever. I said, what on earth is this? An Indian language is a clutter in your head. I completely understand. But it should not be divorced from the unique cultural experience and presented by the Hindu Mahasabha, which actually promised equal rights to religious minorities. I don't because rights are given. What is making it right to be out here? People's Theatre Association was banned. Play Harikaraj Master was banned. And undoubtedly communal in nature. That is something that must be accepted. Because otherwise, we will start which actually promised equal rights to religious minorities. It should not be divorced from the unique cultural experience and historical experience of any community.
The amazing disconnect and
all the Hindutva ideologues, so to speak, in building my case, which is that there is no reference to Savarkar whatsoever. There is no reference whatsoever to even Tagore or Gandhi or anybody else for that matter. And let me start with perhaps a factual correction. Kindly indulge me. Hindutva was not coined by Savarkar. Hindutva was coined by Chandranath Boshu in 1892 in his essay on Hindutva specifically. Long before Savarkar actually wrote on the subject, someone had already thought of it and had actually fleshed out its embodiment, so to speak, and Chandranath Boshu. Yes. So Hindutva, unfortunately or fortunately, is attributed to the mind of Savarkar when in fact it's not. So that's the first factual correction. Second, I wouldn't dare use the word criticism because I would be stepping into too large a shoes. I wouldn't do that. But my own impression of your book is that perhaps it takes a truncated view of what people crudely dub as Hindu nationalism. I have addressed certain parts of that actually as part of my book. The idea is to place the current movement and the awakening of this particular society within the larger canvas of what global scholarship refers to as decoloniality, which is to basically say that post-colonial societies are trying to shed the baggage of post-colonialism and wear the lens of decoloniality to be able to re-access their past and not recreate their past, but to re-inscribe certain values of the past in the institutions of the present and hopefully chart a more indigenous future. But it's not possible to completely create an indigenous future simply because it happens to be an integrated world. And that's the reality that you have to deal with and actively engage with. So the idea is to create perhaps a hybrid future which has a greater quotient of indigeneity as opposed to coloniality. Let me say this with as much humility as I can marshal at this point, that perhaps your previous book on the British colonial period, as well as this book, completely missed the scholarship of decoloniality because unfortunately, Bharat's experience with colonialism is being approached with a blinkered vision, and I'm making a reference to a general school of thought, and I'm not making this personal at all. Because the idea that Hindu nationalism is fundamentally exclusionist and comes to the detriment of and at the peril of religious minorities in this country is to impose the guilt as well as the framework of European nationalism on Bharatiya consciousness. And every mistake and every folly and every massacre or every genocide which was perpetrated in the name of European nationalism is somehow consciously and unconsciously sought to be transposed onto Bharatiya reawakening. I do not wish to call it Hindutva, I do not wish to call it, any Twa, so to speak. I will simply call it Bharatiya Dharmic Civilizational Reawakening, which is what it translates to. The problem is, unfortunately, whenever this discussion starts, we seem to be fixated with certain personalities, which is Savarkar, so on and so forth. I am happy to completely discard Savarkar, and I'm sure this is going to get me a lot of hate mail, completely discard Savarkar to build a case for Hindu civilizationalism or Dharmic civilizationalism because it is possible to do so. And the concept of Dharmic civilizationalism is much larger than any single individual. And to box it and lay it at the doors entirely of one particular person simply because he comes from an inconvenient political camp, so to speak, or espouses a certain cause that may not be politically correct, would be to do grave injustice to the society using one particular individual as the strawman of the argument. So therefore, it is my position, and I say this with all humility, that with due respect to Sri Savarkar and his contributions, because I've seen the tone as well as the manner in which you refer to him, I'm absolutely sure that it's not possible for us to glorify all parts of any individual. You would agree with that. Be it Mahatma Gandhi, or at least I refer to him as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. I choose not to refer to him as Mahatma Gandhi. Pardon me for saying so. Or for the matter, Dr. Ambedkar. I don't think there is a single individual, if you choose to start scrutinizing them, that you would find yourself agreeing with all parts of everything that they say. Be that as it may, you try and make do with those parts which you believe, define them, characterize them. Therefore, for all his flaws and whatever they may be, Savarkar was effectively putting forth a position which was already in public domain and he was capturing a certain spirit. But be that as it may, I don't wish to be the mouthpiece of Savarkar here. The point is, it is possible and it must be so that you look at this particular concept of Dharmic civilizationalism independent of the lens of European nationalism. Unfortunately, the moment this discussion starts, I think people start cherry-picking certain facts, which is that the constitution is fundamentally antithetical to, or is it loggerheads with the Hindutva vision of a Hindu Rashtra, so to speak. So perhaps you may want to look at the draft constitution that was presented by the Hindu Mahasabha, which actually promised equal rights to religious minorities. And the reason why this is important for us to point out is because, assuming for a moment that we did not have the concept of contemporary constitutionalism emanating from Europe, even then, Bharat as a civilization has always welcomed those people who are willing to live with us. We did not have a constitution when persecuted Parsis knocked at the doors of Bharat. We did not have a constitution when, let's say, the Jews from your state, so to speak, and even from the northeast, knocked at the doors of Bharat. So to attribute certain large-heartedness entirely to the constitution, I would say, is to protect the constitution at the expense of the civilization, which I think is grave injustice, grave injustice.
I've never done that.
I'll just finish my point.
When you finish.
So as far as I'm concerned, to assume that the constitution is somehow a civilizing tool which seeks to educate and civilize and, let's say, uplift a certain regressive society, which is at loggerheads with the value of constitutionalism, which doesn't know what is democracy, which doesn't know what it is to accommodate minorities, no. It is a product of the fundamental spirit of this particular land. And despite the horrors of partition, which we must never forget, despite the reality and tragedy of partition, which we must never forget, despite the reality of the two-nation theory, which was specifically foisted on us, which we must never forget, I think this country has done a vastly superior job of protecting its minorities than our former, let's say, estranged cousins, so to speak. And I think the proof of that lies in the fact. So it actually is very, very surprising when we are constantly told that this particular country, if it becomes a Hindu Rashtra or if it becomes a Dharmic civilizational state, so to speak, is bound to become what you refer to in your book as the Hindu Pakistan. I'm sorry, I think that's grave injustice to the people of this country, because accommodation is something, an accommodation, not Western style assimilation. Accommodation has been the spirit of this country because Western style assimilation requires you to convert to their way of life in one form or the other, either overtly or covertly, in order for you to be accepted as part of the particular society. It is this country that makes it possible for people to keep their culture alive in the most perhaps pristine form possible, so long as it does not come in the way of others. So I would actually make the case that Dharmic civilizationalism is what is crudely dubbed as Hindu nationalism. And as a student of constitutional law, not to claim specific expertise or drop names here, I believe that whenever public morality has been referred to in the Constituent Assembly debates, the reference has been to the reservoir of this country's public morality drawn from the vast ocean of dharma. And as far as I understand, the concept of dharma is native to this particular land, so to speak, and its culture. And there is one clarification or correction that I think is very, very important, that it's possible to simply reduce the so-called Indic reawakening, so to speak, as identity politics. It's possible to muddle it to the level of identity politics. In my humble opinion, that would be perhaps the most superficial way of looking at it. Because scholarship, psychology, political science, as well as students of history strike a very clear distinction between identity and consciousness, which is to say you can be a Hindu in name and still think like a foreigner, because your language and your accent and everything could be something that is completely alien to this land. So according to me, identity is less important and consciousness is more important, which is why if I had to choose between an Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh, I would choose a Dara Shikoh simply because in consciousness, he was closer to the Hindu spirit, notwithstanding his identity. But Aurangzeb, for all practical purposes, his consciousness and identity were one and the same, and completely antithetical to the nature of this land and its accommodative spirit. So that is the distinction. And the third point that I think needs to be made very, very clearly, because Savarkar's work, whether it is capable of being misinterpreted, misconstrued, or interpreted in the right manner, is not the touchstone of Indic Renaissance. Because it is the typical strawman, one of the strawmans that's created is to basically say, Hindutva is ethnocentric, it has a certain obsession with race, and therefore, in its rejection of religious minorities, it is merely presenting another form of xenophobia. The fact of the matter is this land has accommodated several races, and not all of these races are necessarily native to what we understand as Bharat. They have come from several parts of the world, but have ultimately become part of this particular land simply because their way of life has managed to find a way of coexisting with us without actually having a fundamental principle which sees us as subhuman or dehuman. So anyone who is willing to let go of any particular tenet that has the effect of rendering me a second-class citizen or a second-class human being, forget citizen, is welcome in this particular country so long as he doesn't threaten to sever my roots to this particular land. So the idea which I'm trying to present is that Dharmic civilization reawakening is not a restatement or a sophisticated way of presenting xenophobia or ethnocentrism, because ethnocentrism and xenophobia are the legacies of European-style nationalism, not Bharatiyata, so to speak. We have to be understood in terms of our ontology, epistemology, and theology in that particular order, not in terms of anthropology. Anthropology is the obsession of the European Westerner, not of Bharatiyas. These clarifications are extremely important. I'll wait for his rebuttal and then I'll go to the next point.
the Vivekananda view of what Hinduism is all about, as I have explained at some length in the book Why I'm a Hindu, rather than the view that has been encapsulated by Savarkar and his followers, including those who are today in power and who have put Savarkar's portrait in Parliament and hailed him as one of the great icons of Indian nationalism. And the reason is that Vivekananda is very clear. He was extremely proud of his Hinduism. But what was he proud of? He celebrated precisely the inclusiveness of the faith. He said, for example, in Chicago, in that famous series of addresses to the World Parliament of Religions in 1893, he said, I'm proud to speak to you on behalf of a faith that has taught the world not just tolerance but acceptance. It's a sentence I read in my teens and that stayed with me all my life, that I kept thinking about. And the more I thought about it, the more profound it struck me as being, because I went to school like most of us studying that tolerance was a good thing, that tolerance was something that you would, a tolerant king is a good king and so on. You learned that in history class. But in fact, tolerance is a basically patronizing idea. It essentially says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will generously indulge you in your right to be wrong. That's all that tolerance says. Whereas acceptance, if you like, the Vivekananda view, says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And this, his description of what Hindu civilization and religion and dharma has taught him, is very much what it has taught me. And from that premise, then, I go to a very different conclusion from SAI Deepak's comments. I don't believe that a young Muslim boy being beaten up in the name of love jihad because he loves a Hindu girl is dharmic. I don't believe that a Dalit or three Dalits being whipped within an inch of their life with a belt because they were doing their job of skinning the carcass of a dead cow is dharmic. I don't believe that this poor young fellow, 2 days after his wedding in Bihar, being tied to a tree and essentially flogged to death while being demanded to chant Jai Shri Ram, I don't think that's dharmic. So when we talk in terms of inclusive dharmic civilization, then all I can say is that those forces that have been unleashed in our country in the name of this political philosophy, whatever you call it and whenever it originated, they unfortunately do not represent the virtues of our dharmic civilization as I have learned them from Vivekananda and from many others. I mean, he wasn't alone, and there were many, many interesting exponents of the faith in contemporary times who built on the work of great thinkers and sayers and scholars.
Yes. In the interest of time, I will stick to specific points made by Dr. Tharoor. First is that he believes that the Hindutva that he subscribes to, or the Hinduness that he subscribes to, is that of Swami Vivekananda. I'm actually happy you said that, because while Swami Vivekananda was happy to speak of universalism and universal brotherhood from the podium of the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, he was very, very clear that universalism cannot come at the expense of pixelation of history, and certainly specific disagreements, theological disagreements, which resulted in constant practice of exactly this value called toleration, this civilizing, condescending virtue called toleration, which was resulting in the proselytization of Indians en masse. So much so, he specifically refers to his encounter with a Christian missionary on a ship either back to or from India, where a Christian missionary was constantly spewing venom against the religion of Satan, which is Hinduism. Swami Vivekananda, despite his belief in universal brotherhood, was forced to catch the Christian missionary by the scruff of his collar and threaten him with throwing him overboard. If I may say so, that according to me is Hindutva or Hindu resistance in action, which is to say, I'm more than happy to accommodate all your points of view, provided you first stop spewing venom against me in the name of your scripture. So the very same Swami Vivekananda, I'm so happy that you've actually cited him, also went on to identify in, let's say, book after book after book, in fact in several tomes, the history of invasions from the 8th century, at least until the 16th century. And this is something that he has never pixelated. So the great thing about these stalwarts or civilizational icons is that they were very clear that there is no inconsistency between recognition of the universal character of dharma and what dharmic communities and civilizations have been subjected to in the name of vidharma. Let's not call it adharma, let's call it vidharma. This is something that is starkly missing, and that's exactly what I've pointed in my book, which is to say that there is a filter called coloniality or colonial consciousness, which actively prevents this particular country, and specifically the majority of this country, from accessing specific aspects of its past and putting it in deep slumber in the name of secularism, because just as you have a problem with, let's say, the concept of tolerance, so to speak, European history, and I'm absolutely sure you're aware of this, is specifically clear about the Christian origins and Christian nature of secularism itself. Such being the case, I think when this particular community stands up and says, I have had enough of secularism, and I've had enough of this inclusivity that is specifically telling me forget everything. You keep citing Dalits, you keep citing everybody else, but you don't wish to talk about the treatment of Kashmiri Hindus and the specific causes behind it. You don't wish to talk about what exactly has happened in Bengal immediately after elections from the 2nd of May. You don't wish to talk about, let's say, certain pockets being created in Assam in the name of religion, dare I say. You don't wish to talk about what is, according to me, the longest running insurgency in this country, which is the creation of a crown colony in the northeast, and therefore there is Nagalim for something. Please Google up what they specifically are fighting for. It's Nagalim for, and the religious figure specifically mentioned. With all these insurgencies going on, surprisingly, it is the Hindu who is the constant subject of scrutiny, whereas everybody else is spared scrutiny and the rod. So therefore the point is, the Hindu has proved herself, not himself, herself, because Sabrimala, herself, to be more than open to reform in every possible way, because way before untouchability was abolished under Article 17 of the Constitution, the temple entry movement was initiated by the Maharaja of Travancore in 1936. That was already done. So several people, inward-looking people, were more than happy. If at all the Dharma Shastras warranted it, they were more than happy to say, we have to move on. So therefore, I am merely saying that this particular community perhaps doesn't get the credit that it deserves, and it gets, let's say, more scrutiny than it deserves, whereas everybody else is spared scrutiny. That's point number one. Point number two, any concept must be understood, as Dr. Tharoor rightly points out, in historical context. I completely understand. But it should not be divorced from the unique cultural experience and historical experience of any community. So nationalism, when spouted by a European who is fundamentally a colonizer, is not the same as nationalism from Savarkar or anybody else who is the victim of colonization at the end of the day, who has witnessed two successive waves of colonization running for at least 1400 years. So to say that when we speak of nationalism, it's the same as European supremacism, I'm sorry to say, is to compare apples with oranges, where you're divorcing the entire history and focusing exclusively on the statement. Here, when we speak of nationalism, it is merely a call for throwing off the yoke of colonialism of two kinds. Therefore, this should not be compared with Europeans for the simple reason that you're comparing the victim with the oppressor and the aggressor. That, according to me, there couldn't have been a greater insult to a victimized and a colonized community. That's point number two. And I'll just make one more point, which is Constitution. Of course, it's a fine document, it's a great document, it must be worshipped. Yes, I get all of that. But the point is, Dr. Ambedkar, after having crafted this Constitution, during the Nehruvian dispensation, rues the fact that he actually created this constitution because he was seeing it distorted under the Nehruvian dispensation, and he says very clearly that I regret the day that I was given this particular task of having to draft this particular document, because now I realize that a terrible piece of document can be used for the betterment of the people in the hands of good people, but a fantastic piece of document and legal document can be completely misused in the hands of scoundrels. I don't, and this I'm not even paraphrasing, I'm using his words exactly. So therefore, the fact of the matter is, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution regretted having to live during his lifetime to see the Constitution and its values being completely thrown to the winds. That's point number three. And the last point that I think is extremely important is the reference to Diana Eck, her book called India's Sacred Geography. Surprisingly, when she refers to India's sacred geography, she chooses not to refer to it as Bharat. She still focuses on India, which is exactly why I decided to call my book India That Is Bharat, because Article 1 speaks of India that is Bharat. Unfortunately, Bharat has been effectively relegated to the margins, whereas India is currently surviving at the expense of Bharat. The problem is, if you look at the introduction of Diana Eck's book, because I've had the specific opportunity to deal with it in my book, she recognizes the fact that as far as this country is concerned, it was created as a consequence of a network of pilgrimage centers. And therefore, there's a triple matrix of nature, culture, faith, epistemology, and patriotism coming together to create this entity called Bharat. But there again, she says, but Hindu nationalism, no. So the problem is, it's surprising that she regurgitates the very same scholarship of Radha Kumar Mukherjee of 1914. She comes out with the very same scholarship on sacred geography of Jadunath Sarkar, of R.C. Majumdar. But we are more than happy to cite a foreign scholar by the name Diana Eck as opposed to Radha Kumar Mukherjee, Jadunath Sarkar or R.C. Majumdar, which according to me is proof of coloniality or colonial consciousness, so to speak, that we still seek the validation of someone sitting in Harvard. So it has to be someone of Indian origin educated abroad, or it has to be preferably a Westerner who's educated abroad. All of them telling us, of course you're great, you have our validation, you have our blessings. So that's exactly why I said perhaps we should have, let's say, a face-off as far as India That Is Bharat and Battle of Belonging is concerned, simply because Diana Eck represents everything that is wrong with Western academia. She, according to me, represents what's happening on the September 11th, which is dismantling Global Hindutva Conference.
We are not discussing that.
I'll leave that.
Let me quickly, but very briefly, just
And I'm the director of Indica Classical Library. Indica Classical Library.
Wonderful.
Is
that
ancient Indian texts?
Yes.
Right.
Is this
Congratulations.
similar to the Murthy Classical Library and so on?
A response to it.
I see. So it's different texts, not the same one.
Yes, a different set of texts. And congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
My questions follow from a reflection. I've read the book fully. It follows from a reflection of section 27 in the book, which is got to do with Kashmir. I have a printout of the political map of India, 10th edition, which was published in 2020 and which is on the Survey of India. And Constitution 51AC reads, and I quote, "It shall be the duty of every citizen of India to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India." So my question is, do you endorse the political map of India published in 2020 unequivocally? do you, pursuant to Article 51 AC, consider it as part of your civic nationalist duty, to use your terminology?
Very, very much. So this is the chapter on Kashmir that
Correct.
Mr. Kalyanasundram is referring to, Jammu and Kashmir.
Right.
And let's face it, if I respect the Constitution, I have to accept the decisions taken by procedures enshrined in the Constitution. As a Democrat, I am entirely entitled to criticize the way in which certain things were done. I have said so in Parliament, and I stand by my words then, and indeed much of what I've said in Parliament is reflected in this chapter, which is that I thought it was a very unworthy sleight of hand by which the constitutional provisions, the letter of the constitutional provisions was followed, but not their spirit. In other words, whereas to amend Article 370, you needed the consent of the state of Kashmir, which is normally a consent given by the elected Legislative Assembly of Kashmir. You sought that consent when the legislature is suspended and the governor you have appointed gives you consent on behalf of Kashmir. That is arguably within the letter of the law, but definitely no one will agree that it is within the spirit of the law. And so on and so forth. In fact, one of my concerns that many Tamil friends have expressed is that the sleight of hand we saw there could be applied to any state of India. Strictly speaking, all you need to do is declare President's rule, kick out the elected assembly even for, say, 3 months, and then change any sort of provisions relating to that state under the same techniques used to get rid of Article 370. But as for Article 370 itself, I said at the time, and I stand by it, that even those who came up with the provision, including Jawaharlal Nehru, never implied it was a permanent provision. In fact, they specifically listed it as a temporary provision of the Constitution. But the idea was that it would be changed only with the consent of the Kashmiri people as manifested through the elected assembly. And instead we have changed it essentially.
To it or not is not just on the basis of who was killed and who were the perpetrators, but on the basis of stated goals and intentions. Let us not forget that as far as that movement is concerned, the larger goal was to actually express solidarity with the establishment of the Ottoman Caliphate, so to speak, and to say that the dismantling of that particular caliphate is an attack on Islam, so to speak. Therefore, to say that this was a peasant rebellion, 20 years down the line, we'll have the very same historian saying that because most of the best houses in Kashmir were owned by Kashmiri Hindus, what happened there was again a rebellion of the proletariat, so to speak. That's what we'll be told next. In fact, that theory is already started, that the problem that most of the people had there was because of the affluence of Kashmiri Hindus. Therefore, what happened there was the same thing. We have another line of history basically saying that the person who demolished Somnath 12 times was doing this to effectively free the people from the oppression of the Brahmin there. Even that history has started. So therefore, I'm sorry to say this can't be accepted, because the fact of the matter is there is a clear solidarity with the movement which is Islamic in nature. Second, you see both the Hindu landlords as well as the British colonial masters, so to speak, as co-conspirators who are holding on to lands belonging to a particular religion. Clearly, the communal flavor of that particular entire movement is out in the open. There is really nothing to judge after that. The fact that a few people who were killed also belonged to the same religion of the perpetrators doesn't change the fact that the intentions were clearly communal in nature. Most importantly, it is to the credit of a lot of people who must have sheltered Hindus, no doubt. But let us not obfuscate and indulge in obfuscation when we say that the intention behind the, or let's say the trigger behind the movement was manifestly, avowedly, irrefutably and undoubtedly communal in nature. That is something that must be accepted, because otherwise we will start laying the groundwork for, let's say, for apology for everything that has happened in this country. I mean, if we are absolutely clear about what happened in 2002 in another part of the country, giving it a religious flavor, why is it that we are so hell-bent on whitewashing everything else? I think the only competitor here, the only competitor here is Asian Paints or Nero, like they're doing a better job of whitewashing facts.
This incident is not even mentioned in this book, so this honestly has nothing to do with the book launch we're doing today. But I should mention that there was a Khilafat movement which the mainstream political parties, including the nationalist movement under Mahatma Gandhi, had endorsed. And it took various forms throughout the country, mostly peaceful, and in some places the movement descended into violence, number one. But the Khilafat movement was not purely a Muslim movement, because non-Muslims were officially identified with supporting it, starting with Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress of the day. Secondly, if you read, for example, there's a letter published in the Hindu in Madras by the man whom the Hindutva movement today loves to demonize, Varim Kunath Muhammad Haji, who was the man who was then finally caught, arrested and executed by the British, and who is demonized today as this communal slayer, and who in his lifetime wrote to the Hindu and insisted they publish it and threatened the Hindu with violence if they didn't publish it, saying that as far as he was concerned, there was nothing communal about agitation, there were Hindus fighting on his side, and that people of any faith would be welcome to take refuge in his lands, which at that point were not under British control, and that he was essentially there to fight against colonial oppression.
A common Hindu or a common citizen do to at least slow down and to stop the damage to some extent that is happening to Hindus and to civilizational cause? Is there a practical action plan that we can adopt? And how do we win this civilization battle in the long run when we know that demography is destiny? Do you have an action plan? That would be wonderful to know if you have.
No, definitely. Definitely there's an action plan, but I'll tell you the the amazing disconnect and Dada has really put the finger on the pulse, you know, and it's, I'm amazed. Dada, are you an independent, were you an independent MLA or from आज तक कभी किसी कांग्रेस एमपी ने इतना कभी किया होगा क्रिटिसाइज गवर्नमेंट को? This is the difference. Please remember this and re-elect him. And I'm also removing my nota thing, and but I'll tell you the disconnect, and this is why Saism, when he says that when people come to power, what happens? I will ask you a question, and please name one BJP minister, leave minister कार्यकर्ता, who will say openly that terrorism is. वो उल्टा, अरे हम तो बता रहे हैं आपको, नाविका जी, राहुल जी, टेररिज्म का रिलीजन है ही नहीं. और यहाँ लोग डेटा पे डेटा कलेक्ट किए जा रहे हैं पागलों की तरह कि 31,000 टेरर अटैक्स हुए हैं बेस्ड ऑन इस्लामिक प्रिंसिपल्स सिंस 9/11, and you are saying terrorism is. I've changed my view. There is a little bit of this anarchic कीड़ा that has gone into me ever since Supreme Court said on farm bills कि भाई वो कहाँ हैं जो कि pro farm bills हैं, वो तो हमें दिख नहीं रहे हैं. Basically they wanted 86% of Indian farmers to come out to the streets, not till the land and produce farm produce, but they wanted those 86% farmers to come out to the Supreme Court and say, look, we want these farm laws. This is what our country has been reduced to by the judiciary. Ki those who are doing their work in far-flung areas around India, who are creating wealth, who are making produce, they have to leave all this, and Supreme Court wants, because it wants to see, it only sees the anti-farm bills. It wants to see the pro-farm bill protesters, so they have to come. But if be that as it may, I think Hindus must come onto the streets then. Use the Supreme Court's Brahmastra and say Hindu temples must be under the control of Hindus. That is the first thing. I don't want to scare you with data because one of the most authoritative guys, the other is our mutual friend P.R. Ramesh. No one has worked more on this than these two gentlemen. Lakhs, not even lakhs of crores of money that is legitimately Hindu is being lost, is being gained by the government because the temples and their land is in the control of the government. The government is dictating how and preventing Hindus from running their own colleges, their institutions, their Vidyapeeths, everything that other religions are doing at breakneck speed in health, in education, in providing every amenity, down to, as he said, making lawyers and judges, who knows, maybe army people. But Hindus are being prevented. What are Hindus going to do for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? People like Sai and others have been crying, look, government has no business to control Hindu temples. What has happened? This government, your government, BJP government has controlled even more temples in the last 8 years than the Congress had. If it wants, it can overturn the overturning of the 1959 Supreme Court judgment. That Congress overturned. BJP can overturn that overturn. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit, what's the word for it, inception here. But the whole point is, what are the Hindus going to do? They voted this government. This government is a Hindutva government. अब वही नहीं करें तो क्या सड़क पे आ जाओगे? But I don't want, because all of you are earning, doing money, creating wealth that anyway this government is taxing to run. अब आप वो सब छोड़ के सड़क पे आओगे? What can be worse than that? So of course, Chef, there are issues that Hindus can tackle. But I think this seed of anarchism, unless it gets into the Hindus, would be a tragedy. I don't think the Hindus' issues can ever be solved.
Declare yourself a Hindu state. You can't have it both ways. That's it. You choose what you want to do. पैसा चाहिए तो परिचय को बदलो. That's it. Otherwise, I don't see the point in filling up office. This is not a facetious statement. I'm making this very, very seriously. Because then we will have to confront the absolute worst of values inherited from the West, secularism. Then you'll have to confront that. And you'll have to call out the BS it is. And then you'll start talking about a lot of things. Now that's one. But what is it that we can do as Hindus? One, don't leave Bharat for California. Please. Kindly, please. गांव छोड़ दिया, शहर छोड़ दिया, भारत छोड़ दिया, तो बचा क्या, किसके लिए लड़ रहे, मेरे को समझ में नहीं आता है. वहां से क्या, you will want to form a diaspora fighting for a country which has vacated the country. Kindly, please, stay in Bharat. This is the way of the future. Shakti has traveled everywhere and has come back to Asia. It has finished its journey in the rest of the world. The history of the world is a movement of energy. Energy is finally coming back to its source. Kindly stay. If you're looking for perhaps being a part of the most interesting, exciting generation, notwithstanding the troubles and challenges ahead, this is the place to be. Bharat is the battleground and Bharat is the way of the future. I'm not saying this for any other reason. शिवलिंगों का अपने आप बाहर आना अपने आप में कुछ संकेत है if you're a believer. Idols which have been, I'm a hardcore believer. I hope that doesn't affect you.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
Hardcore believer. इतनी सारी मूर्तियां जो 400 साल, 500 साल दबे पड़े थे, वो बाहर निकल रहे हैं. The explosion of interest in Bharatiya Sanskriti is tremendous. The voices that are being produced. I am a low-grade hustler. Ignore me. Look at the number of Shastric voices coming out, trying to protect traditions, who don't get the kind of space and the social media position advantage that we get. So, these are signs. And Dharma believes in cosmic signs. I cannot ignore that. 3. संस्कृति को बचाने से पहले परिवार को बचाइए. जो आपके बच्चे हैं, जो वोक बन रहे हैं, उनको पकड़िए. because the motto of the left is you have power, we have your children. And they're investing in the future heavily. The rubbish from the United States has been refused by France, but India still doesn't have the guts to refuse it. I will never subscribe to gender-specific binary, non-binary pronouns in my life. I will never do this. This is internet karma. I'm saying this. I will never redact this particular position. As a Sanskriti that has dedicated temples for transgenders, which has celebrated in its own way, I don't need to learn your refuse. One, you don't need to teach us how to treat these people. They're our people. The worst of terms which are used to address them don't come from Hindi, they come from Urdu. Therefore, we have our own ways of, let's say, looking after our people. 3, at least at home, have a 3-tier system wherein the Matrubhasha finds some space. Please do. I will tell you the extent of my own coloniality. How seeped we are in English. 2 days ago, when I was actually trying to buy something on Amazon, for some weird reason, it switched to Hindi. It was such a clutter and irritating clutter in my head. And I said, what on earth is this? An Indian language is a clutter in your head, and a language that you're comfortable speaking in, and a language that you're comfortable conversing in. Because you see, speech is okay, but reading is important. Because then you won't forget the script. Now, you will remember, you will read. How many can write now in mother tongues? Thank you. I'm so grateful. And force your native press to not simply transliterate English words in Marathi or Hindi. Computer ko computer mat bolna. I'll tell you why I'm so proud of Tamil language chauvinism. I'll say this. Let me just answer this question, and I hope I don't offend sentiments. If I do, that's okay. The point is, the Dravidianists see Tamil Brahmins as Aryans, and we are castigated left, right, and center. Whereas all the prime literature has come from the Tamil Brahmanas. Subramanya Bharati, who they worship, is my distant relative. He's actually the damad of my family. And he was a cherut smoking Tamil Brahmin. So if you go to Nepal, they have traditions where they castigate Rama because ladki ko diya, dekho kya kar diya. In Bihar and other places, they won't give their daughters in marriage to people coming from Uttar Pradesh and Koshal. There are certain traditions there because they carry the memory. Similarly, we say this about Subramanya Bharati. Dekho hamari ladki ke saath kya kar diya. Because the man never earned. He was a thinker. Cigar smoking thinker at home. Okay. But the point is, retain your mother tongues. There is a reason why you have Ishtadev as a concept. You owe your duty to 3 sets of devatas. Your Kula Devata, because that protects your collective identity as a group and the traditions that go with it. Your Grama Devata, which is your guardian deity. Your Ishta Devata, you choose according to your nature. That's exactly why Dharma offers you this 108 baskets. Choose what you want or mix and match. And choose a deity according to that. And once you have chosen or subscribed to that, please make sure that at least once a week, you dedicate in some form to that particular deity, because all this talk is useless because you have to match the other guy in his commitment to his deity. And that is something you must learn from them, no matter what. It's not wrong. He's wrong because his point of view is against us. And he has positioned himself as matter and antimatter. But our commitment is where we are fundamentally, let's say, it's a shaky wicket. So in a previous talk somewhere I said this, the principle is what I call the SIP principle. Spiritually fit, intellectually fit, and certainly get physically fit. Make one trip to Israel and you'll realize not one gentleman I saw there had a paunch. Once I came back, I realized kuch na kuch to karna padega. I can't go like this. So each of these components are important because it makes a difference. One of the reasons that Guru Gobind Singh specifically had physical attributes for the Khalsa, especially the beard, is to invite and invoke fear. The Kada was a sign of metal and Kshatra. They still call the weapon, the art of learning weapons, in their own corrupted form, Shastra Vidya. It's nothing but Shastra Vidya. So my suggestions would be the following. Hinduism, as Rawatji said, unlike Islam, is rooted to a particular bhumi, which is why you pray as you worship to the bhumi as well. It's a consecration that happens with every ritual, so protect and stay. This is your land. Others can leave because it's not their motherland. This is our mata. You can't leave. 2, protect your children, your language, and we don't have the voluntary concept of zakat, fortunately so. 10% to any organization that does service for dharma in some way. Hindu hai to bandhu hai is the bottom line. Thank you.
I don't need to tell you when Mani talks about the BBC and saying we didn't ban the BBC film. Right, you didn't ban the film. You banned the BBC for 2 years. His exact expression was, lights are dimming. Honestly, they seem pretty bright to me out here.
यही नहीं, अभी और सुनिए.
Film Nastic was banned. Whoopert Pop Music was banned from AIR. People's Theatre Association was banned. Play Harikanaz Master was banned. Film Ganga Jamna was blocked. Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay's play Mahesh was banned. Tagore's play Gora was banned. Balraj Sahni's play Jadoo Ki Kursi was banned. Tagore's play Bharat Ranjan was banned. Bharatji's film song was deleted. 2 songs from Fifth Row were banned. Harmonium was banned.
Hello everyone, स्वागत है आप सभी का. The 7 threatens them that they'll have to pay a price if they can threaten retired judges. What about lowly journalists? So friends, as I said, lights are dimming. on democracy and on freedom of expression.
Not bad, not bad. Now you
Just a small anecdote of how we are all children of money in one sense. I didn't mean to give away his age by saying that. He doesn't look a day older than 95. But at the alumni meet in St. Stephen's College, the one preceding him was ex-Foreign Minister Natwar Singh, and he got very soggy-eyed, and he wrote in the register that everything I am today, I owe it to this college. And then he went away and Mani followed him, and then Mani scribbled underneath what Natwar had written, why blame the college? Even a drunk acupuncturist delivered less pain per square inch than the arguments that we've heard so far from the other side. The reason for that is, and abhi to sai bhi baki hai, but we start off by saying that we believe what we see. But unfortunately, what we see is increasingly being written by people who see what they believe. And that is what the media is. They are seeing what they believe. Journalism is justice delivered without the courts. It is a public good. It is as important as delivering justice. And I'm stating the obvious here, but the tragedy is that most of the journalists that you see are busy peddling narratives. They have become activists. They're not balanced anymore. They're not objective anymore. Even in science that the moderator talked about COVID. And I say, please do not bring politics into science, because all then you would end up with is political science. But and there's nothing wrong in that. But there are a dozen, I don't know how much time we have, whatever X time I have, I'll take 30 seconds more than that. But the fact of the matter is I can bust a dozen narratives, fake narratives over the last 8 years that have been peddled. And Sai can maybe bust a dozen more narratives. Talked about BBC, he talked about Bofors, and he talked about how well-meaning and gracious the government was. I don't need to open that Pandora's box. I don't need to tell you how much stress and how much draconian measures were put under Chitra Subramaniam when she was doing the story of Bofors by Rajiv Gandhi and the PMO. I don't need to tell you when Mani talks about the BBC and saying we didn't ban the BBC film. Right, you didn't ban the film. You banned the BBC for 2 years. And it wasn't under the emergency. It was before the emergency. 2 years. So, and this is the problem with journalism. It somehow, over the last 8 years, it is giving the impression that everything bad that is happening in this country is happening for the first time. That before 2014, India was a Garden of Eden. Everything was perfect. And then we had this Cambrian explosion, that everything that could go wrong, except for a nuclear explosion, which we don't even know, maybe some newspaper would report a nuclear explosion has also happened. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Let me pick up the other thing that Mr. Kulkarni talked of. His exact expression was, lights are dimming. Honestly, they seem pretty bright to me out here. Democracy is under threat. Democracy is under threat. This is ridiculous. And I'll prove it. And this is the last fake narrative that I'm going to bust and before I pass it on to Sai. This democracy is under threat. Everything. The biggest test of a functioning democracy, and my good friend Salman would agree because he's in the court, he's an eminent lawyer, are two things. The independence of the Supreme Court and the independence of the Chief Election Commission. Other than these two things, everything else is at the mercy of our constitution. And I put it to you, I don't know what will happen to me once I say this, that we have been a banana republic ever since we became a republic. Our constitution does not respect freedom of speech and expression, period. And whatever little it did was then soon trampled within a few years by Nehru's First Amendment. I'll come to that in a minute. Chacha ji ki baat karunga abhi. The fact of the matter is that all those who say democracy is dead, lights are dimming, and everything is happening for the first time, this assault on democracy, sedition charges, anti-national, do they even know that under the UPA, and I'm not talking of Indira Gandhi emergency, and one doesn't need to go as far back as that. Let's go back only 8 or 9 years. Under the UPA, it filed 12,000 sedition charges on activists, 8,500 on the same day. And the then Home Minister, Mr. Chidambaram, yes, when he was asked why are you doing this, he said, and I quote him, these are all anti-nationals. आपके anti-national. और आज के जो चल रहे हैं anti-national, उसका क्या?
Well, you are absolutely right.
तो अगर आप यहाँ तक हमारी वीडियो देख रहे हो, they slapped a sedition charge on a person who complained of a blackout, a power cut. They filed a sedition charge under him. So many things are happening right now in Congress-ruled states, but democracy is flourishing there. In Bengal, a non-BJP-ruled state, a chemistry professor shared a cartoon of Mamata Banerjee. He was arrested 2 weeks ago. This news we don't even know because the Telegraph is all very prim and proper and doesn't want to go against Mamata. He was acquitted after 11 years. A chemistry professor. 11 years. Democracy is flourishing in Bengal. So, when we are this selective, we need to answer ourselves more than we can answer the public. So, yes, all these things are happening. In fact, the most iconic phrase in the last 10 years that has been coined has been by Mr. Arun Shourie, when he says that all the BJP is Congress plus cow. And AAP, of course, is Congress plus Lamao, LMAO, but that's another matter. That's the problem in this country. Nobody tells you these facts. People only tell you one-sided stories, like, for example, that Nehru was the paragon of liberty and freedom. Everything else, Indira Gandhi might have done emergency, but Nehru nahi. Chacha Nehru didn't. Let me take the next couple of minutes and tell you what the status of freedom of speech and expression under Pandit Nehru was. Jawaharlal Nehru. The first amendment was brought in. Reasonable restrictions, incitement, disruption of public order. Who decides who is disrupting public order through freedom of speech? Poet Majru Sultanpuri was jailed for 1 year for calling Nehru Hitler ka chela. 1 year. One of our greatest songwriters and poets brought it in jail. Did you know that? First democratically elected communist government in Kerala was dismissed. Congress president said communist parties wouldn't be allowed to participate in general elections. Stanley Wopert's book 9 Hours to Rama was banned. The book Chandra Mohini was banned. Audrey Menon's The Ramayana was banned. Campbell's The Heart of India was banned. Koestler's The Lotus and the Robot was banned. Import of any newspaper that undermined friendly relations. No, I need to go on because this rubbish fake narrative needs to be busted right here and right now. Flischner's Aisha was banned. Bertrand Russell's Unarmed Victory was banned. Robson's film 9 Hours to Rama was banned. Sadhani's Markane Somnath was banned. Robert Taylor's The Dark Urge was banned. Selling Lady Chatelier's Lover was banned. The book What Has Religion Done for Mankind was banned. Ratnawat's Bhupat Singh was banned. Import of any obscene drawing or painting was banned. Mrinal Sen's film Neel Akshar Neeche was banned. Tony Hagen's book Nepal was banned. The RSS organizer was censored. Its publishers prosecuted. Film Gokur Shankar was banned. Godse's testimony was banned. Goswami's film Rumi was banned. Historian Dharampal was jailed and criticized for Nehru for Indochina War. Releasing the film 1962 war film Bhool Na Jana was blocked. Pandit Rajendra Prasad's speech was barred from distribution. Film Jharna was banned. Draconian press objectionable ban was passed. Columnist Vivek was fired. His column critical of Nehru discontinued. HT editor Durga Das was fired. His column critical of the Nehru family discontinued. Congress leaders demanding Nehru's resignation were arrested and jailed. Ads to Times of India was discontinued for speaking against government policy. Magazine Crossroads was banned. Play Nigame Communist Ke was banned. Its actors arrested. Hindi film songs were banned from being played in the AIR. Congress demanded a ban on iconic film Parasakti. Film Nastik was banned. Rupert pop music was banned from AIR. People's Theatre Association was banned. Play Harikaraj Master was banned. Film Ganga Jamna was blocked. Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay's play Mahesh was banned. Tagore's play Gora was banned. Balraj Sahni's play Jadoo Ki Kursi was banned. Tagore's play Bharat Sarajan was banned. Paradeep film song was deleted. 2 songs from Fifth Subha Hogi were banned. Harmonium was banned. This is Jawaharlal Nehru, the paragon of freedom of speech and liberty. Is there anything left to be said? If it is, I pass it on to Sai.
This is the Sri Ram College, right? Yeah. Jai Sri Ram. Right. The fact that the Congress has been in power for a longer period of time, ask any student of constitutional law. Almost every decision on free speech involves a clampdown on free speech by Congress-ruled governments, either at the state or the center. So at the very least, the Congress must take a look at its own history before it starts pontificating to the rest. And you're certainly in no position to pontificate today. When all the information is out in the public domain through the social media, people have access to judgments, people have access to decisions, file noting, so on and so forth. You're in no position to pontificate. To aid him, 30 seconds. Yes? So I would only request you to ask yourself only one thing. Self-regulation in India is a non-existing word. It's a non-existing concept. There's not a single body that can be trusted to regulate itself. I say this as much of the judiciary when it comes to its collegium system, and I say this as much of the media. Now, on the point that Mr. Kulkarni raised, that the government is thinking of setting up a center which can crack down on fake news. The Press Guild does nothing. The Press Council of India does nothing. No action has been taken against any organization or any portal or, let's say, individual journalist for their direct role in, let's say, spreading or manufacturing fake news. What are we supposed to do? You can't go to a court asking for directions against a private party in a writ petition. So what do you do then? The government has the task. You know why? Because if fake news starts on WhatsApp, particularly in the context of riots or any kind of communal violence, so to speak, and let's assume that the trigger is a lie. it falls upon the government to have a mechanism to actually trace that lie back and also perhaps nip it at the bud. So if the government were to actually go against all kinds of news, that's a different issue. But to say that the government doesn't even have the right to go after fake news when self-regulation as a concept is completely failed in this country, I'm sorry to say, what are we really batting for? This is exactly what happens when you choose to go after every policy initiative merely because it's the BJP at the helm or the Congress at the helm without asking what is right and what is wrong.
Share space with Kamraj 2.0. In 2022, I think I had the opportunity to call him Tamil Nadu Tamai. Kamraj 2.0, why? One, because it's time that Bharat had the third Prime Minister from the South. But before that, Tamil Nadu put on the Putunoy 1967 model of that virus that has gripped the holy state of Tamil Nadu, this dharmic land, needs to be eradicated first. Kalam, Samayam, time has finally given us this option. I request the Dharmikas in Tamil Nadu, the Hindus of Tamil Nadu, to throw their weight behind this man. I'm making this public. It is now or never. This is a do or die battle. 2026, Anju Pushkaram, 60 years, since 1967. It is time to take a decision. You have to mean business. Every vote matters. Every middle class vote, every thinking vote must not think of it as a holiday, must go out in the sun and do whatever is necessary. We are just 2 years away. This was not meant to be a political speech, but unfortunately, our land has been heavily politicized, our religion has been politicized. I'm left with no other option but to speak about this bluntly. When we speak of think like a Bharatiya, and since he has touched upon the topic of secularism, I'm happy he's actually done that. Over the last 3 years, something tectonic has taken place, and I think it's important for people to take note of it. I'm speaking in Tamil primarily because there's a YouTube audience that's watching, rather than English because there's a YouTube audience that's watching. And ennoda Tamil silipper pidikadhu. One, decolonization has finally entered Indian political discourse, and that's a fantastic victory. The tragedy is that this conversation should have started in 1947, and it has started in 2020s. No other post-colonial independent society can boast of this kind of prolonged mental slavery. Ever. I know what people like me have gone through in Tamil Nadu. I've witnessed it on campuses. I've suffered the consequences of it. But the only promise and sankalpam I made to myself is that I will never become a jati activist. I will speak for the community as a whole. I have no pretensions or delusions of becoming a leader at all under any circumstances or a representative, but I will certainly ensure that every ounce of my energy and brain is used to support people like him. Because I think it's time we did away with the concept of politicians and we think of thinking leaders. This is what we want. People who understand the concept of Rajadharma. That is crucial. That takes me to the concept of secularism. Because anybody who understands the history of secularism will tell you that secularism is political conversion. Its job is to sever your roots, your connection with your roots. Its entire purpose is to make sure that you forget your past. And it becomes the new religion because humankind cannot survive without religion. Therefore, secularism has become the new religion, unfortunately. The purpose of these tools is to ensure that you forget one of the most important, let's say, concept in the life of dharmikas, which is pitris, ancestors, your people, your forefathers. That is why I call it political conversion, because conversion requires you to spit on your past and to embrace a new identity that's completely antagonistic to your earlier identity. Hence, it is political conversion. Knowing fully well that this would be the problem, that it's a time bomb that's going to burst itself on a regular basis against the indigenous community, the framers of the constitution chose not to use the word secularism as part of the preamble at all. All those fears, all those apprehensions have been vindicated with time to our detriment. To our detriment. There was a time when there was a different kind of a procession taken out of the Kanchi Matham in 2004. Finally, this man has gone to Kanchi. As a proud follower of the Kanchi Matham, I am super happy. Think like a Bharatiya. You can't think like a Bharatiya as long as you embrace secularism, is my humble submission. It is cognitive dissonance. If you think like a Bharatiya and also wear secularism as a badge of honor, you can't. They're incompatible. They're mutually destructive. And they're mutually exclusive. தமிழ்நாட்டுக்கு விடிமோட்சம் கிடைக்கிற வரைக்கும் பாரதத்துக்கு விடிமோட்சம் கிடைக்காது. People like Dushyant Sridhar and others will continue to do what they will do on a public platform. But until this becomes a social, cultural revolution, don't expect people like him to fight this battle alone. It is impossible for us to survive and come out unscathed in this battle unless and until you realize that it is not your job anymore to simply outsource even your cultural battles to the politician. Because this battle is being waged on your streets, in restaurants, in movie theaters. Dare I say more? I can. And the worst part is this cancer has entered the rest of the South. Bhakti should have been the biggest export of Tamil Nadu. This Dravidianist cancer is being exported to the rest of the South. In my living memory, I have never seen a separatist sentiment being expressed on the Dharmika state of Karnataka ever. Even that has happened because the way this cancer enters is actually true and consistent to its origins, which is cinema, which is art. So that's how it has entered Telangana and Andhra Pradesh through movies. That's how it has entered Karnataka. Kerala, of course, never needed it because it has its own cancer. This civilization is a dharmic civilization. Own it, embrace it, be proud of it. That is fundamentally decolonization. If someone says, does it mean that we should embrace everything about the past? When every time I speak of decolonization, I get this nonsensical statement I'm forced to say, does it mean that you have to spit on your past? No, you don't have to. These are not binaries. Anyone who chooses to focus exclusively on the problems of the past is not a well-wisher of the civilization because according to him, there is nothing positive worth being discussed. You have to look at the entire history of the civilization as a whole. It's not a monolith. And the civilization is called a civilization thanks to the scale of its diversity. So the realities, the political realities, the jati realities, the economic realities have been different in different parts of the country, but we are all painted with the same brush. So my suggestion to you is, we will keep doing this intellectual nonsense because that's a battle that has to be fought at a certain level. But what is it that you can do if you have to think like a Bharatiya? Drawing from Mr. Annamalai's speech. 1. Temple tourism in Tamil Nadu must boom. Repopulate our temples. Take back those spaces. Support all temple communities, the operative word being all. Use the temple to unite people. Use the temple to educate people. Bring them out of perpetual victimhood. Oh, is it too sensitive a comment? Sorry? Adu nadakkum. Wait for it. It will happen. Today, our temples are held ransom by an ideology that has vowed destruction of our religion, has taken an oath for it, and they're being true to their political masters who are within and outside the country. The links go far beyond Bharat and they've entered Europe. So you have to realize the magnitude of the problem that people like Annamalai face. These battles cannot be contested alone. I have no political affiliation whatsoever. I can say this bluntly with him being on the stage. My affiliation, my fealty, my loyalty is to my community, to my dharma, period. And precisely because I see a representative of dharma in him, I will support him. It is absolutely crucial that we understand the challenges. There are a lot of issues and deliverables that are entirely within our control. The first suggestion was going to the temple. There are Sardarjis, members of the Sikh community who sing in Tamil, in Kumaramgundam and other places. I've seen that happen. That is the unity of this land. Char Dham Yatra is impossible without coming to the south, and Sikhs also perform the Char Dham Yatra. The utter nonsense that is being peddled about this community is a direct consequence of our ignorance. In the age of internet, none of us has the excuse for being ignorant. At all. You think it's easy for somebody like Dushyant Sridhar to wear the Tripunda and go to the television and face all the people from the D-stocks? The kind of hatred, the kind of poison, the kind of bile that is being hurled at people like him is unbelievable. How do these people function? Not on your support, but because of their inner spiritual core. Because most people think it's easy for people like him and I to take these positions because there is some popular support. None of you is going to be available. Your intention may be to protect us, but you cannot be available all the time. So the point is not to protect us, but to start finding replacements for us. Keep creating them. These can't be personality-driven movements. Learn one thing from the Asura. Whenever you think of tapas, you think of the Asura, because Asura tapas is unbelievable. Because when they commit themselves to something, they latch onto it. I learned from the Devas as well as the Asuras. I'm very clear about it. We must start looking at producing Raktabija Devas. Every drop of blood in the land of Sanatana Dharma must create more Dharmika warriors.